Okay. So today, we're going to have a bit of a different twist to sessions. We've noticed that we don't have, some people are shy to open their mics and contribute. So I just wanted to encourage you that there are no right or wrong answers. We're all here to have a better understanding of the work that we do and how best we can serve our communities. So on today's session, like I had mentioned, we are working on developing effective policy briefs, which is communicating for change and developing a concise and persuasive policy brief. Our objectives are to highlight the importance of effective communication in influencing policymakers and stakeholders through the policy briefs, to equip you activists and myself, because I am also looking forward to learning through the engagements, with skills to create impactful policy briefs. The third one is to understand the role of policy briefs by distilling or breaking down complex information that is normally shared in these mechanisms of UNFCCCs into community-based or contextualized actionable insights or community project, however you deem it fit. The fourth one is to highlight the importance of brevity, of making brief and clear policy briefs in order for you to be able to capture attention in a busy policymaking environment. The year is filled with so many conferences, and sometimes it's hard to keep up with all the different policies that come up, with all the actions that are required. So it's very important for you to be brief and clear so that your information can grab attention and easily be understood by the various communities or stakeholders that you are appealing to. In our policy brief, the key elements are an executive summary, which needs to be clear and portray a compelling impact. This is where you provide your readers with a quick understanding of the issue, recommendations, and expected outcomes. One of the reasons your stakeholders in your policy briefs would be world leaders. You have to have a short information for you to be able to capture and maintain their attention. So this is how you capture that with the executive summary, so that they are intrigued in reading more of your information or in engaging with you further. The second element is the problem statement, which establishes the significance of your problem. Now, when you're developing your problem statement, you should use compelling language and evidence, which must be contextualized to make the problem relatable to whichever stakeholder that you are presenting to or you have done the briefing for. The third element is to provide a factual and logical foundation for your recommendations. You do this by presenting data visually through charts or graphics. And this requires the use of statistics, expert opinions, case studies, and examples to bolster your arguments. This goes back to the previous trainings on data research and analysis, how all of that builds up to the work that you're going to go back to do in your respective communities. The fourth element is recommendations. After you've captured your problem statement and you've backed it up with qualitative and quantitative data, you have to make recommendations that are clear and practical for addressing the problem that you have stated. Now, when you are developing or writing your recommendations, there's a certain kind of language that you need to use that is compelling or action oriented, that can probe someone to want to take action and take action as soon as possible, as you use those action-oriented verbs to convey that sense of agency of the issues that we're facing in the front lines. Then your final element is the conclusion. This is where you summarize all your key points, you highlight the urgency of the issue, and leave a lasting impression to motivate your readers to take action. Now, when you're preparing your conclusions, it's important when you're doing your policy brief or when you're developing your policy briefs to share with your colleagues so that you can have feedback, any other thoughts that might come up, and also to think about potential counter arguments, about any conflict that might arise, or any other concerns that will be different with your views, and be prepared to be able to answer them, because some people, we know, in different environments, you present a very good idea and someone will stand up, not necessarily because they disagree with you, but they want to test your level of understanding. They want to test and see if you understand what exactly you're talking about and if you are confident enough. So always be prepared and have that in your conclusion, not necessarily in writing, but in your backing when you're doing your presentation. Now we are going to do a case study. And in today's case study, we have two case studies. We'll do a policy brief on bridging the gap, bridging the digital divide in rural Botswana. In our executive summary, we have, in today's digital age, access to internet and digital technologies is essential for education, livelihoods, and addressing climate change, right? That's why we're here. However, rural communities in Botswana face a significant digital divide, limiting the ability to engage in climate action. This would be the argument that the reason why some communities seem reluctant to participate in climate action is because they simply don't understand what is going on. They don't know the policies that are available for them. And in our problem statements, it goes on to state about the lack of equitable access to digital technologies or the internet, and how this perpetuates challenges that we face in adapting and mitigating the impacts of climate change. How all these climate related issues are becoming more urgent, and that rural and remote communities don't have access to the resources and tools that they can use to participate effectively. In the policy brief and on our evidence, one of the key elements is limited connectivity. This talks about how there's a lack of reliable internet connection hindering access to climate information. Just like I think majority of us here are, if we're not in towns, we're in cities, we still face that challenge of a reliable internet connection. Now, you wonder about how the situation goes deeper, and also other issues of affordability. Then there's educational barriers. It means there's limited, inadequate access to online education, of adaptation finance, the various tools that they can use, even in students or activists or different kind of entrepreneurs or other stakeholders in joining climate action, participating on the various mechanisms that they can take part in solving the problem that we see with climate change. Now, this also exacerbates the economic disparities and limits the climate awareness. Now, when we go on to the next key element, the recommendations, which should be and well supported. Um, we recommend that there is expanded rural connectivity. We recommend for digital literacy programs that can be implemented through networks, community networks. If there's a connectivity hub somewhere, then there can be networks around that ensure that there's information sharing. Promote local climate initiatives, support local climate adaptation and mitigation projects by rural communities with digital tools to access funding. This also draws on the importance of having those networks and associations where one person or a few people who have access to those hubs can be representatives of that community at different levels of engagement on parliamentary level, multinational level, international level. Weather and climate information access platforms can be developed so that they can receive real-time weather and climate information. Now, this is one that goes back to Internet of Things. There are so many other amenities that can be used. There's a USS code, which uses SMS features to share information. So these are some of the things that we can recommend and engage other relevant stakeholders to partner with us to develop these on our policy brief. By bridging this gap through expanded connectivity, digital literacy, and access to climate information, we can empower these communities to actively participate in climate action. This not only
Hi, Tato, we can't hear you very well. Specifically on this slide that we are on, the conclusion. Hello, Tato, we didn't hear you very well on this slide. Maybe if you could please reshare about this final slide. For now, anyone with a question, you can be putting them in the chat or you can raise up your hand. I think that will be glad to address all our questions.
all right. Thank you. I think on this policy brief, before we move on to the next case study, do we have any questions so far on the elements that we have described? Questions or any other engagements?
Let me check if anyone's hand is up. Okay, for now I don't see
If
any
no one,
question.
what if? Okay, then I'll ask the question. Who do we think is our audience in this policy brief? I think you can select one or two people. Who do they think is our audience here and why? Before I move on to the next slides.
Joy Koech, would you like to try that one? Let me take another one. What about Adong Pauline? Would you like to try to answer that? Okay, I think no one is ready to answer. Maybe you can help me answer that question because I also didn't understand who is our audience in this policy brief. Yeah, then also
Okay.
a question I also had is do we share this policy brief before a policy has been passed or after? Then Joy has also asked me to unmute her. Let me unmute her. Maybe she has something to add.
Pardon? Please repeat the question.
Yeah, my question is, do we share this policy brief before a policy has been passed or after a policy has been passed?
It depends on whether and on who you are appealing to. If you are appealing to world leaders, then you would have to present it before, because it includes research on how it's important that they address the digital divide in rural and remote communities. If you are presenting such a policy brief to, say, an intergenerational community in a rural and remote area in Botswana, then you are trying to appeal to them to take part in climate action, and then you present to them the available policies that have been adopted or are in implementation, so that they can be able to take part in them and contribute to climate action. But this particular policy brief was developed for intergenerational community in a rural and remote area in Botswana, so that they can understand that climate change is real, but they don't seem to have access to the information that they need, the resources that they need, because of the lack of digital infrastructures in Botswana. And you're compelling them to, one, take climate action, two, to also stand up or raise their voices in advocating for infrastructures that will assist them to be on a competitive level, so that they can be able to access mitigation and adaptation policies. But I'll share more on that in the next case study and how the both of them are linked together. I think I saw a hand.
Yeah, there's a hand here from Tim Derrick. Then I also saw Okumu Alan's hand was up. I think let me start by Okumu Alan, then we take on Tim Derrick. Let me get Okumu Alan. Okumu Alan, are you still interested to speak? You can raise your hand just to show me that you're still interested to ask your question.
Oh, and Joy also asked to be unmuted. I think she's ready to share.
So Derek, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you so much. My name is Derek Otem from Uganda. I had two questions, and the first one was asked by Joshua, but let me just add on, like, how is how is how does the how does the policy brief, how is it important to our communities?
All right, Sato, could you address that maybe? Or you wait for that? You can address that as you wait for that question.
All right.
Sorry. To make myself clear, I'm sorry, I had two questions. The first was asked by Joshua about whether the brief policies is, whether it is after or before. The second one, I want to understand how important is it to our local communities. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Having a policy brief is important because it breaks down technical jargon or technical language into actionable steps, into information that is relatable to your stakeholder. I will take for an example, I think you have seen different policies that are on the UNFCCC. Some of the documents can span to 45 pages. You can't exactly present 45 pages to elders in rural and remote communities, let alone just anyone. It takes a lot of time to be able to dissect that information. So conducting or developing a policy brief is important so that you can take the key relevant information and break it down into information that a simple person can understand and want to take part in whatever or whichever project or community program you are trying to engage them in. Now, this varies also to different stakeholders. If you're talking about breaking down world leaders, you contextualize it to what is happening on the ground with the data and research of your community and present it to your world leader, compelling them that these are the commitments that are being made, and you have signed this or ratified that. This is what's happening on the ground, and these are the steps that we think as youth activists we think you can do in order to facilitate our communities.
Thank you, Sato.
Thank you.
I think you can continue as I look through the chat with the next section. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. There was also Joy. I don't know if she wanted to share, if she wants to share before I move on.
No, not at all. You can continue. You've already. It was the same question as Joshua had as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay. It's very important for you to start with your 5 W's and H. This is how you break down this is how you break down your, sorry, my screen froze. Okay. This is how you break down the big technical papers into a question. You need to know who you are addressing, what it is that you want to say, when, why, where, and how. So in this Bridging the Digital Divide policy brief, who is affected by the digital divide? This is intergenerational communities in rural and remote areas in Botswana. Who are the key stakeholders involved in addressing this issue? This is the government, these are NGOs, these are local businesses that are in the communities, local businesses that are in technology, local business that can provide funding for implementing or developing that kind of digital infrastructure, local businesses that are in the climate change policy space, climate action, and etc. What? Then you need to define what is the digital divide and how does it manifest in your community. I have mentioned that the digital divide in Botswana signifies how we don't have access to network connectivity, or when we do, it is unreliable, especially in rural and remote communities. What are the specific challenges faced by the different generations in bridging this gap? You will face different challenges where the older generation feels like digital infrastructure is not a necessity. Then you will have the young ones who are compelled or interested in accessing those, but they don't have an understanding. So you need to break down all those different challenges faced by each generation and try and group them to be one or two major challenges. What are the existing policies or initiatives related to digital inclusion in Botswana? And how can you harness or take advantage of these to probe or to get other stakeholders, that is the government, other NGOs and local businesses that have the capacity to support your work? When did the issue of this digital divide become prominent in the community? It would also go back onto how, when we were experiencing the COVID-19 pandemic and we were in restrictions, there was that need to share information. And there was that transition to the fourth industrial revolution where now you can't live life without technology because you have access to a whole lot of things and stand a better chance of success by having access to a smartphone or having access to internet. And when are the proposed recommendations expected to be implemented? The fourth W would be where in Botswana is this digital divide issue most prevalent? In rural and remote communities in Botswana? Where can community members currently access the internet if they can at all? This would be if your community project aims on providing these entrepreneurial data or technology inclusive hubs at the center, or what would be what are they called? Customary court, like where it can be a centralized place where everybody can have access to them. Where would digital literacy programs and infrastructure improvements be most beneficial? This one also goes back when you're appealing to the different stakeholders that can support your work. You need to be able to show them the steps of how you're going to move from one key area to a different key area to another area, in terms of accessibility, in terms of being able to conduct those necessary trainings that you will need to do. Why is bridging the digital divide crucial for the community's well-being and prospects? What are the previous efforts that have been done, if any have been done? And why should stakeholders prioritize this issue now? Then you go on to describe how you propose your recommendations to be implemented in the community, how you propose those recommendations to be implemented by world leaders, and how all the other relevant stakeholders can collaborate together to ensure the success of your project, and how will progress and success be measured in terms of digital inclusion. So with that being said, if there are no other questions, I will take on another case study on climate change.
There is a question in the chat. It's from Excel Amafule. He's asking, are we all to participate in a policy brief? Or it's a certain group of people, and when would it be published, and where would it be published? Yeah, that is his question.
I think a policy brief is just as good as doing your research, and where it could be published is just for your own background and understanding, to back up your grant applications, to back up your community development programs and projects, to back up your advocacy work. Thank you.
Then also Joy has a question. Let me unmute her. Joy, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, so I have a question. So I am also doing a presentation about like mangroves, and I am stuck in like that policy and like in my presentation. My question is like, even in all of like, because I mean the mangrove restoration, like, so like, do I in policy, I didn't want, when I want to like present the policies that should be taken to the restoration of mangroves, am I also going to use the guidelines of who, what, and how can I do that? If you could just give me like a hint. Thank you, Tato.
You're welcome. Let me understand your question. You are asking that in developing your policy brief or presentation, you're asking if you should use the 5 Ws and H, right? And how you can contextualize them to...
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So going back to the 5 Ws and H, the answer is yes, because it will help you to unpack the different policies that are available, if there are any, and how you can package that. Because remember that our key elements, are having an executive summary and problem statement and the evidence. So having or going through unpacking your policy brief with the 5 Ws and H help you to develop your executive summary and problem statement in a way that it will guide your research, evidence, and help you to develop the recommendations. Because remember that your recommendations need to address who is being affected, what the problem is, when did this start, and all the other different aspects or dynamics that feature into mangrove restoration. So if we use the same model to drive the mangrove restoration, it would be who is affected by the lack of mangrove restoration, right? Are we still together? And who are the key stakeholders involved in addressing this problem? The problem that would be the problem that you are trying to solve with restoring mangroves. That is creating a carbon sink for your community in order to be able to curb or mitigate climate change. What is mangrove restoration and how does it manifest in the community? It includes planting a tree. This includes educating students. This includes educating your local leaders and appealing to your world leaders on how perhaps the syllabus can be changed to include climate smart technologies, to include climate smart agriculture, and so on and so forth. I hope I answered your question. Okay, we are left with 15 minutes, so I think I've answered Joy's question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tasha. Thank you so much.
Okay. Moving on to the second policy brief is in enhancing accessibility of climate change policies in rural Botswana. The executive summary is in rural remote areas of Botswana, climate change is no longer a distant concern, but a pressing reality with all the different effects of it disrupting the lives of the people who rely heavily on agriculture and livestock. Now, what is the compelling impact? In the previous years, we have seen a decline in crop yields, resulting in food shortages. We have seen access to clean water reducing significantly, and the incidence of waterborne diseases surging due to the death of livestock at clean water sources. And now this crisis not only affects the current generation, but poses a grave threat to the future of children by developing other autoimmune diseases. Now this shows that we have used statistics and we are appealing to our audience, which is intergenerational communities in Botswana by talking about how this affects their daily lives. It talks about how they don't have access to clean water, how there has been food shortages, and how there has been a surge of waterborne diseases and development of illnesses that children are prone to. How are we setting the tone? The time for action is now. That shows the urgency that you are communicating. We cannot afford to stand by while our lives and well-being are at stake. By advocating for more accessible climate change policies, we can ensure a better future for ourselves and generations to come. So this uses strong, relatable language to your audience as it is still compelling and uses action-oriented verbs. What is our problem statement? The issue at hand is the lack of accessibility of climate change policies to rural communities. These policies are often complex, written in technical language, and not readily available or understandable to the very people they impact, as well as the lack of technological infrastructure. And this lack of accessibility means that our communities are missing out on the critical opportunities for support, funding, and resources to take part in climate change. And this perpetuates a cycle of vulnerability that leaves us struggling to cope with the impacts. This statement on its own highlights the significance of why we should have these policy briefs being implemented or being shared with our various communities. The evidence that goes back to previous trainings of data and research shows a recent study found that 80% of rural communities in Botswana do not have access to climate change policies or information. As a result, 60% of proposed adaptation projects in these areas are left unfunded and unrealized. Naledi, a local farmer, says, I hear about climate change policies on the radio, but I have no idea how they can help me. It's like they're written in a language that I can't understand. Now, this is backed up through testimonials, and it goes back to Excel's question. What are the recommendations? They should be, remember that they should be actionable. Create simplified versions of climate change policies in local languages and distribute them in community centers and schools. You are addressing the problem. Establish community workshops and training sessions to educate locals on the relevance of climate policies and how to access them. This cancels out any counteractive communication or opinions, and advocate for the appointment of local climate change liaisons through the networks that you have developed. In conclusion, improving, or our call to action would be improving the accessibility of climate change policies is not just a matter of convenience. It's a matter of survival, and it shows how important it is. We must bridge this gap to secure our future. And the slogan that you can perhaps use for enhancing accessibility of climate change policies is that it's time for communities to stand up and demand accessible climate change policies that work for us. Together we can adapt, mitigate, and thrive in the face of climate change. And that will be the end of our case studies. As always, we end with my favorite quotes, that the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. Thank you. I'll open the floor for any other questions. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I think we can take on like 2 questions, either in the chat or you can raise up your hand.
There's a question from Excel. He's asking that can we pair up on, I'm not sure I understand. Joe, can you unmute him so that he can explain?
I think he's requesting like for a practical activity, if like we can pair up and work on a policy brief maybe after a call, or he's wondering if each individual will be working on a policy brief independently. Was that your question, Axel? You can confirm with a message in the chat. He said that that is his question, so you can respond to that.
Okay, I think it depends on how each region wants to go about it, if we do want to do a policy brief. But I think it's a welcome suggestion, more not entirely a question. So I think let the team leaders perhaps decide on how we can go about it, and then it will be shared in the Telegram group. What do you suggest? Okay, thank you.
Maybe just to add on that, you may be working on a policy brief. You can feel free to reach out to Thato, to anyone that you would like to support you on that process. Yeah, I think that is also something which we can work on. If you're on a policy brief and you desire to have help from anyone, feel free to reach out to them. Yeah, thank you. There's no any other question in the chat. Let me check if any hands are raised. Okay, I think there is no hand which has been raised. At this moment, I would like to thank every one of you for sparing time and joining the call. It has been really nice to have you on the call. I would request maybe you can turn on your videos, and today you're going to just say bye-bye. Just turn on your videos and you say bye to the camera. Let me change the settings so that everyone, yeah, now you can turn on all your videos. We just say bye. So bye-bye. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. See you next time on, I think it will be a Monday. Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good day. And those who were able to participate in yesterday's Twitter storm, we thank you very much. You can do the same today because the Twitter storm is still continuing. Thank you. Bye-bye.